Brian, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Well, John, I'm doing great, man. I just finished a jujitsu session, so that's why I'm wearing the hat. And it'd be kind of gross if this is about as presentable as I could get at 10:30 in the morning here. So I'm sorry about that, but
No problem, dude. That's hilarious. I just finished one myself, which is why I got a bit of a shiner
you got a
going
little
on.
shiner.
Yeah.
That's good, man. How long have you been
Yeah.
training for?
Coming up on a year. It'll be a
Oh,
year November.
awesome,
And
man.
how about you?
I started when my oldest daughter was born. She's 8, almost 9. So I'm
Oh
coming.
wow.
I'd done kickboxing for a long time, and I trained with high level kickboxers for years. And so then I went to an MMA gym. Was doing the sparring days with the MMA guys. Like I don't know if you know who Dan Henderson is,
Sure.
but
UFC fanatic. So of
yeah,
course.
okay. So I was a training partner for Dan Henderson for like his Vitor Belfort fight, his
No shit.
the second Michael Bisping fight. And when he was training to fight, he never fought John Jones, but he was scheduled to fight John Jones, and that fight fell out. And so I was mimicking John Jones for him, but just the striking side. So back a long time ago, I would go in and do rounds with these high level MMA guys, but I was just doing the striking days. And so I thought, oh, I can do MMA too. So I went and did 2 amateur fights and just got my butt grappled to the ground the entire time. Because every striker thinks, oh, if somebody tries to take me down, I'm just going to throw a knee and knock him out. That is not easy. That is very hard to do. So I was getting taken down by purple belts and just getting outpointed on the ground. And so then I fell in love with jiu-jitsu, and I've been training, almost 9 years now in jiu-jitsu. I'm a brown belt. I'm a 2-stripe brown belt in jiu-jitsu now. And I was out for a month. I dislocated 3 of my ribs. And so this is like my 3rd day training back, and happy to be back.
That's awesome, man. I trained a lot of intermittently a lot of Muay Thai prior to doing any jujitsu, and mostly by virtue of the fact that I was either in Thailand or very close, and I used to like and go and kind of vacation and train at the same time. But I've kind of fallen in love with jujitsu. I mean, it's so cerebral. There's so much you can learn every time. You can go hard with probably taking less damage than going hard striking. That was because you want to go hard, because there's just that impulse to go hard. But when you do it in striking, it's easy to kind of hurt yourself. And I enjoy that aspect about jiu-jitsu, and of course all the other reasons, the great workout, the practicality of it. But I mean, it can be, I'm finding it can be a little bit rough on the body, so I'm trying to get myself used to the ways in which it's rough, and of course trying to make sure your training partners are careful, and you granting that same respect, so that you can both train in advance and not get too banged up. But yeah, I've been loving it. You must have competed in kickboxing to be at that level and be training with those guys.
No, I'd been training for a long time. So I never even, I always was, planning to do a Muay Thai match. And by the time I was serious enough to do a Muay Thai match, I thought, oh, MMA is the route to go.
Right.
And UFC 1 proved what my thinking was wrong. I mean, I was doing this and I was trying to reinvent the wheel in 2014 or whatever, when I was going out to do MMA. But in 1993, the UFC already proved that a striker is going to get out grappled. But we're just, I think maybe it's a little bit of hubris or something like that. And I thought I'm the exception. Nope, I'm not. I was not the exception. And but it was a big wake up moment for me of like, man, the ground grappling arts are integrally important, and I think there's a hierarchy. There's like a pyramid to martial arts. I mean, once 2 grapplers, nullify each other, then whoever has the striking on top of it is going to win a fight. There's advanced levels to it and things like that. But man, there's just, like you said, there's so much nuance to it. So I do a lot of competing in jiu-jitsu now. But the team I'm on, it's called Checkmat for people that don't know jiu-jitsu. Checkmat's a pretty popular team, but like you said, it's this very cerebral thing, and that's where this name Checkmat comes from. It's almost like it's human chess. It's this idea of trying to think 3 steps ahead of your opponent and seeing where they're going. And honestly, I mean, it's a lot of what I write about in my book, and we'll get into that, the Bitcoin stuff. But I think that's a lot of what Bitcoiners think about. We're trying to think about like yes, I understand that the narrative is this, or the Fed is doing X, Y, and Z, but what are they really doing? Like, what is this setting up 3 or 4 moves down the road? That's why I think there's such a correlation between jiu-jitsu people and Bitcoiners, or jiu-jitsu people and freedom lovers. And, it's an interesting correlation that happens, between the mats and economy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think there's an interesting parallel too, where part of jiu-jitsu, and again, like I'm a beginner effectively, but it seems to me that part of the approach is like you have to find the pockets, not only just thinking steps ahead and setting those traps and stuff, but you have to find the pockets where you can be calm and relaxed, where you're not just frantically going crazy, right? And so like you find a space and you're like, okay, I'm safe here. Now what's going on? What are the attack vectors? What are the opportunities? Okay, move forward, find a safe space. Okay. And you just keep doing that. I mean, again, like it's kind of a parallel for how Bitcoiners and anyone who's trying to see themselves through these, crazy, tumultuous times that we're living in, kind of has to have that approach, right? Not be overwhelmed by the chaos, but also not shoot your wad early, right? You've got to find a way to kind of mediate the chaos in these fits and starts where you're preserving as much energy as possible. And then when there's an opportunity, you make a move to advance your position. And I think that's partially what we're all doing.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. I'm going to write that down.
All right. So tell me about your Bitcoin story, and we'll get into what you've been working on and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So my Bitcoin story is very much, I feel like everybody's. We heard about it early on, thought it was a scam, and disregarded it for a period of time, and then came back to it. And it's usually the second or third time you come back to Bitcoin. For me, the first time I ever heard about Bitcoin, I think it was 2012. And I never watched college football, but I was watching college football like Saturday game day, and it was right before the game. They have the announcers, the guys talking, breaking down the game right before it happens. They have the audience right behind them, and there's a kid in the background, a college student, and he had a big sign with a QR code on it, and it said, "Hey mom, send Bitcoin." That's all it said, and I'm like, "Whoa, what? Awesome. Send Bitcoin? What's that?" And so kind of forgot about it, watched the game. A few days later, I'm like, what was that Bitcoin thing? So I Google it. Turned out that kid had like $24,000 worth of Bitcoin sent to him on that weekend, because the Bitcoin forums back then were blown up. Because Bitcoin
when was this? Sorry,
this 2012. This is 2012.
Okay.
When, yeah. So Bitcoin's so small at that time that all the headlines on the crypto websites were Bitcoin was on ESPN, not like they were featuring it on a segment, but like it made it in the background. Like that's how like low key Bitcoin was at the time. So I'm like, wow, this is really stupid. Like this is so dumb. It was just this little thing that the QR code, and this guy got money sent to him, didn't really understand it. And then I had some friends about a year later that were talking to me about it. And so I kind of approached it as more of a skeptic. I said all the things that you say, Bitcoin must be a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid scheme, all those types of things that it's get rich quick or whatever it is, it's going to be a rug pull. And so in my study, it really forces you to go down the rabbit hole of economics. You have to study money, monetary history. You have to study economic history. You don't have to study those things to use Bitcoin. And I think that's the big barrier. A lot of people that are coming to Bitcoin, like, oh, I don't want to have to, read books from Mises or Frederick Hayek or something like that in order to learn Bitcoin. You don't have to understand that stuff to use Bitcoin. But for those that are intellectually curious, and we're in those early stages, I think it is important for some of us, the kind of the early pioneers. We're not pioneers now, but like the people that early on, when you're learning about a new technology, it is important to understand the nuances so that we can pass those nuances kind of distilled down to the next generation of people. But anyways, it was, all that study was kind of intriguing me, but it was this one light bulb moment was Andreas Antonopoulos was on the Joe Rogan Experience. And the one thing that he said that caught my attention, when he basically said, he was talking about digital scarcity. And I'd heard people talk about digital scarcity, but it never clicked. But what he said was, in the history of computer science up until 2009, until Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin and blockchain, there was no way to make a digital thing scarce. And so kind of the way he reiterated that was, imagine you go into a Word document, you type out a word, you can copy and paste it infinitely, right? And this became, actually, there was a monetary thing. You can see it very clearly in the music industry. What happened when music went from cassettes and CDs and records to MP3 files? It disrupted the music industry, because all of a sudden you got these websites like Napster and LimeWire that you could take digital content that had monetary value, right? Songs had a lot of monetary value, but they lost all monetary value as soon as they went digital, because you could replicate them endlessly. And so how do you have a digital economy and digital money if anybody? So right now, the Federal Reserve can print money endlessly, infinitely. But what if everybody could do that? Like if you had digital money, literally anybody with a bank account would be able to copy and paste their. So we'd have, you know, a billion Federal Reserves out there. That'd be exponentially worse than having one single, you know, Federal Reserve. So it was.
You mean like other cryptocurrencies? Sounds like you're describing.
You know what? There's almost there's almost some poetic justice to that. Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of what people are trying to do, right? Create their own infinite thing. So, but with Bitcoin, there's this way to digitally cap that, right? It was the first time in computer science that we were able to cap something digital. And that was kind of the light bulb moment for me.
And when was that?
That was 2013.
14, 13,
20, maybe really early 14, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those days when Andreas was on Joe, because I started paying attention around that time as well. And like, I also remember, I think because the show was live back then. And so they actually, I think Andreas did like a demonstration. He generated like an address for Joe. And like, as the show was streaming, they were like, you know, anyone who's got Bitcoin, just send it in. I should watch, it would be interesting to, because I don't recall how much was sent in, but it would probably be a lot in today's exchange rate.
Right.
But yeah, Andreas was so great back in the day in how he so clearly and calmly and methodically and logically described, you know, what was going on with Bitcoin and helped educate people. And I know he drew in a ton of people, especially people that came in the couple of years that followed that. You know, now there's so many content creators and so many podcasts and so many books and so many videos that there's a lot of touch points now. But back then, I mean, he was a massive funnel for early people coming in. Yeah. And so, you know, I'm assuming that started the rabbit hole journey. How did it develop from there?
So I think like a lot of people, well, I mean, maybe people that have a good reputation, I still don't fall like fully into Bitcoin maximalist category. I think Bitcoin's the only sound money in terms of digital sound money, but I make an argument for, you know, treating other blockchains as maybe speculative tech, but without going down that kind of nuanced thing yet. What a lot of people do is they learn about Bitcoin, they get into Bitcoin first, then they see all the other returns that other friends are getting on altcoins. And so then you become intrigued. It's like, wow, if I would have invested in Litecoin, you know, because people are thinking of it not as a technology, they're thinking of it as an investment. And so you see something, you know, early on Litecoin shot up, then people that bought Ethereum early on, it shot up. And so you're seeing kind of this FOMO of people buying these other altcoins. And so like anybody else, I started to try to learn more about altcoins, Ethereum, and then, you know, every branch down that chain. And I even started working in 2018. From 2018 until last year, I worked for a small blockchain project called Ethereum. And so the whole core of that project was to try and decentralize learning content. And it was this kind of nebulous idea that I thought was interesting at first, but like a lot of Bitcoin purists, they go down that rabbit hole and then they come back to Bitcoin. And so I think that to me, it reverts back to the mean. And so for a lot of people, we need to go through that journey, right? We need to kind of study and learn about the pitfalls and potential ups and downs of what blockchain is versus what, you know, specifically Bitcoin is. And for me, it was, I still think that there can be value in using blockchains for other things outside of money. But I think the biggest and most important thing is Bitcoin. I think that's at the core of it. And so what I saw in my journey working, I was the chief marketing officer for that blockchain project. And so we would go and we pitch venture capital guys, you know, hey, invest in our blockchain project because, you know, you're going to be at the cutting edge of the Bitcoin or the blockchain revolution. And we would do this pitch to them. And then at the end of the pitch, so we were pitching all this complicated stuff and they'd say, well, what is blockchain? What is Bitcoin? And so we were realizing we were trying to pitch them like level 4 or 5 complicated stuff. And they wanted just the basics. And so guys that were managing hundreds of millions of dollars, I was realizing pitch after pitch, they don't even understand what Bitcoin is. And so that's why I literally resigned from the project. I'm like, going back to first principles, we need to help people understand what the fundamental tenets of this technology are before they're even looking at it as an investment. Because literally guys were coming in ready to sign like $10 million checks, not even understanding the fundamental tenets of a technology, just hoping that they could like ride a speculative wave. And I just kind of saw that as detrimental to the space. I mean, it's the easiest way to create a bubble in the cryptocurrency, the larger cryptocurrency space that like can have this this almost like contagion effect that could affect Bitcoin. And I don't want collapses in other spaces and other blockchain projects to affect the reputation of what I think is a sound form of money in Bitcoin. So that's why my focus is kind of reverted back to just Bitcoin Evangelism. That's the title of my book, is talking about the fundamental tenets of this technology and why they matter in terms of money.
And so I have a few questions there, but I guess first, like, so you decided to write this book. When did you start writing it?
I started.
When did it come out?
It came out 2 months ago, June. Yeah. So almost 3 months ago now.
And it's called Bitcoin Evangelism?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And how long is it?
It's almost 400 pages.
Holy shit. Well, can you, I mean, hit me with it a little bit. Like,
give you the full...
give me the summary.
Okay. Well, I've got the audiobook coming out. So for anybody that doesn't want to read 400 pages, we literally just completed the audiobook today. So, and the guy that narrates it does a great job. And he's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, by the way. I didn't even find that out until after we did the project. I'm like, oh, we got another kindred spirit here. But nice. In a nutshell, kind of reverting back to what I was saying is, so many people think of Bitcoin or just cryptocurrencies in general as an investment first. And so I have so many friends that I talk to, and it's like, oh, you bought Ethereum or you bought Bitcoin. Great. Like, why'd you buy it? And the answer you get 99% of the time is, oh, I bought it because it's going to go up in value, right? Okay, you're speculating. Okay, that's your right to do that. But I think that we're at the convergence, we're at this point in history where things are aligning, where we have the first ever, like, really sound form of money that has this digital component to it. I think that's really important. So the first half of the book is making the pitch for Bitcoin as a technology. The second half of the book is like, okay, well, if you're going to go down, if you're convinced that this works as a technology, maybe here's some of the things that you consider if you're going to be putting your money into it. If you're going to be treating it as an investment, if you're a company and you're going to use it for your treasury reserves, right? Because you're worried about inflation over the long term. Like Bitcoin as a short-term inflation hedge, I think that's not a good idea. But as a long-term inflation hedge, I think there's a strong case for Bitcoin for companies and treasury reserves and things like that. So there is an investable component to it. I think that's a big part of it. But you need to understand the fundamental tenets. What makes for sound money, first of all. Okay, I think Bitcoin fits that bill, and there's a whole chapter devoted to why Bitcoin works as sound money. There's a whole chapter as why Bitcoin actually has inherent value. You'll hear the Peter Schiffs of the world talk about Bitcoin. Oh, it has no inherent value. I can use gold because I can make electronics out of it, or I can make a bowl or a spoon or something out of gold. But you can't use Bitcoin for anything. And I have a chapter devoted to why Bitcoin, in fact, does have inherent value.
Why does it?
Yeah, setting you up for that one. Well, like, I spent my early years of, like, my adulthood in sales, and so the first thing you learn in sales is you have to ask questions. And so I give it several different answers for why Bitcoin has inherent value, and different people are going to want different answers. Like if I'm talking to somebody, and I have some friends that are pretty influential in the freedom movement, like some people, some influencers online that were organizing a lot of rallies over COVID and things like that. When I'm talking to those types of people, if I'm on her podcast, I'm not talking about Bitcoin as so much as an inflation hedge, although those people are starting to ask questions about that. I'm talking to people about why Bitcoin matters as freedom money, because those people are very aware of what happened in Canada at the beginning of this year with the trucker rally. And they know that, people raised $10 million to fund, to give, GoFundMe, and GoFundMe blocked $10 million of donations. So that was one instance of a third party, a private company, blocking transactions. And then even once another company popped up, Give, Send, Go, said, hey, we'll process those donations and send those to the truckers. Then the Canadian government stepped in, and another third party, the Canadian government, said, no, anybody that sends donations to these bank accounts, we're going to freeze those bank accounts. We might even say that you're funding terrorism. Like they passed the Emergencies Act. And so laws were enacted very quickly, potentially prosecuting people for donating things. The only thing that kept the Canadian trucker rally going were Bitcoin donations. And there was all sorts of headlines about how Bitcoin wallets were being seized and things like that by the Canadian government. Not true. That was a few exchange wallets that were maybe frozen or blocked, but we know that software on your phone or software on your computer, you can send Bitcoin and it's not going to get blocked by the government. They have a very difficult time doing that. And so when I talk to people in the freedom movement, talking about Bitcoin as freedom money is really, really important. When you talk to people, we have some missionaries from my church that were just over in Poland housing Ukrainian refugees. And so they were working with the women who their husbands were back fighting the war, but then they were in Poland with their children, with all of their stuff. They had all of their stuff. Well, when I'm talking to those people, when I'm talking to the missionaries, I'm like, well, if those refugees had their money in Bitcoin, they were able to take it with them, right? Like they were able to, but their Ukrainian bank account doesn't transfer over to Poland, right? And so when I'm talking to missionaries that are helping with the Ukrainian refugees, that's a completely different pitch to them. And then when I'm talking to the guy in the elevator that needs a 30-second pitch on, why Bitcoin has value, I'll ask him real quick. I'll say, well, what do you think the combined market cap of just Visa, MasterCard, and Discover are? And they'll say, I don't know, something big. I'm like, well, yeah, the market cap of just those, and keep in mind, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of money remittance around the world. But just those three companies are valued at like $700 billion. So at the very least, the use case for sending money in the United States is $700 billion. So we know there's an inherent market value to sending value. Now let's add in what ACH payments are, what Venmo and PayPal and bank transfers and wire transfers, all like there is an inherent value to sending value around the world. And that's provable, that's quantifiable. And so Bitcoin can not only do that, but it can do it without anybody's permission. So you can add on some extra multiple of value because Bitcoin is censorship resistance. You have sovereignty over your money. So what extra value does that have? In the same way that digital maps have exponentially more value than paper maps did, right? Paper maps was like a $40 million a year business. Digital maps has created trillions of dollars worth of new industry, right? Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, DoorDash, none of that exists. Amazon doesn't exist at the scale it does without digital maps, right? So going from paper maps or analog maps to digital maps creates exponentially more value in the same way that we're dealing with an analog fiat currency. Well, the market cap for companies that transfer fiat currency is $700 billion. Well, what happens when you have a natively digital currency? The market cap for that or the inherent value of that has to be some multiple above and beyond that. So again, those are kind of the tips of those arguments. But yeah, it really depends on who I'm talking to.
Well, I think that's the point, right? And I think that's why, certain Austrians and people in the Bitcoin space might push back on the inherent value moniker, right? Because they would suggest that all value is subjective. Now, everyone would agree that Bitcoin has a ton of potential use cases, and it's those use cases that may or may not be valued by market participants. Right. But I think the reason why potentially it is not beneficial to use that type of language, because that, as you say, like Peter Schiff will, and Peter Schiff knows better. So he either just has like crazy BDS or he's being disingenuous, but he knows that nothing has inherent value. Nothing. It depends on what the individual wants to use it for, what their aim is. Right. But I think the problem with that framing is that it's the same framing that like the hardcore socialist, communist, collectivist people will use as well to discredit it. Right. And so using the framing of something having inherent value or not may not be the best way to go. Rather, everyone has different use cases for everything. And dependent upon those use cases, they might value or not value things. And should we not respect everyone for their desire to value or use whatever they desire to value or use? So is there you mentioned the Austrians a few minutes ago, so I'm sure you're familiar with that argument. Is there a reason why you went with the inherent, moniker in the book?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, actually that you're writing out that line of thinking perfectly. So the way that chapter opens is the Austrian answer. So it says, why does Bitcoin have inherent value? Well, the Austrians would say that nothing has inherent value, that there's just market value, right? And so I essentially opened the chapter saying that's, for most people, a very unsatisfactory answer. So unless you study Austrian economics, Austrian, people that study that have great respect for that, right? I respect that's a great conclusion. what I'm talking about, that's why I kind of referenced that whole thing about when you're doing sales, right? I don't want to I'm not trying to sell Bitcoin, but it's the same concept. When I'm trying to teach something, when you're doing sales, you're teaching somebody about a product or service, right? So we're doing that same thing with Bitcoin. I'm really relaying it to what people are asking. And so I use the term inherent value because I believe that answers what people are trying to get at, right? Like if
how it might be valuable to them,
right? So why does this have inherent value to you? Because again, that's why I'll say, I'll ask the freedom person, like, would that be valuable? Would that be inherently valuable to you if you were, doing a protest and you had no other way to continue your protest and get funds in except for through Bitcoin? Like, that would be inherently valuable to their process, to the things that they do. And so, and maybe that language it lacks some specificity, but what it means to that person is very accurate. And so, yeah, it's more of the subjective, it is a very subjective value. But to that individual, they perceive that as inherently valuable, if that makes sense. Because again, Peter Schiff says that all the time. Like, well, why is gold valuable? Because I can make electronics out of it. Because I need electronics to, I need a phone, I need a smartphone. So I need gold, to make sure my smartphone works, because that's valuable to me. I need to have a smartphone. You're right. That's not the Austrian answer. Austrian answer was like, well, no, you've placed a market value on that, yada, yada, yada. But that would, I guess I'm using the broad, the unlearned version of that question. Because again, Bitcoin evangelism, by the way, isn't talking to people that have studied Austrian economics. I hope that they do someday. But this, the working title I had for my book was Bitcoin so that your grandma could understand it. Not meant to be Bitcoin for dummies. It wasn't just to dumb things down, but it was like, how do we talk about things in just a common language? The book's very conversational. Like, the people that have been reading the book, I've been getting really good feedback. It's on the Amazon bestsellers list. I think it hit as high as like number 7 in the inflation category. So it's cool to be a part of that conversation. But the people that are reading it and that are passing along to their friends, they're saying, wow, this felt like my buddy was talking to me about Bitcoin. So it's meant to just meet people where they're at. And if you think about it, in Christian evangelism, like what Christians do when they're evangelizing is they're going out and meeting people where they're at, right? Like, Jesus used language, because he was out partying with the sinners and talking to the sinners using their language, not using this, like, he wasn't like the Pharisees, who were these really righteous people that had their own language. To modern day Christians, we have all these like fancy words that makes people on the outside not want to become Christians, because we use words like sanctification and baptism and the gospel, like all these words that sound really weighty. So Christians have gotten away from using this simplistic language to welcome people in. But that's kind of what I wanted to grant an homage to, was how do we, if we're evangelizing something, how do we use simplistic language? Like, people use these terms like inherent value, or how do I explain something that isn't in the current language? Like, the average person doesn't talk about trustlessness. Well, how do I insert something like trustlessness or something being trustless into common language? And so, you got to figure out ways to explain it to somebody. And how do you explain what Bitcoin's trustless, like, don't trust, verify. Okay, I can go look at the ledger and make sure it happened. So there's that component of it. But people get really uncomfortable with, like, how do I trust an algorithm with all of my money? I mean, that's probably the number one question I got from people that, whether it was family members or people I was consulting with. They're like, how do I trust that? That's like, that's the whole point. You don't have to trust. And so they'll say, well, I would never trust an algorithm with something that important. I said, you trust an algorithm with your life every single day. When was the last time you went through an intersection? And they're like, I drove through an intersection on the way over here. Well, do you not understand that when that's an algorithm? When north and southbound have a green light, east and west have a red light. We place a ton of trust in algorithms. We actually place so much trust, we don't even consciously do it. And that's what trustlessness is. It's not the opposite of trust. It's the absence of need for trust, because the algorithm just works. And so trying to bring language of these complex terms to regular people, the way I say it all the time is, I'm one caveman trying to explain Bitcoin to another caveman. That's kind of the tone of the book.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I can certainly appreciate that you don't want to get bogged down in, the intellectual or academic notions of Austrian economics and the terminology, rather, or at least not initially, because what you're trying to do is just impress upon them that it's very likely to be the case that one of or more of the use cases that Bitcoin permits or represents is likely to be of value to that person. And so, maybe for that reason, you can get away with using something like inherent value. And I think, to your point about, most people do come into this and they see the gains and they think it's a speculative asset, right? I want to come out of the back of this. I want more fiat, is the impression for a lot of people. And because that's how it's been largely framed in the culture. And that's also, people aren't conditioned or haven't, it's unprecedented to have their unit of account be what's being upgraded, not the nominal amount of the former unit of account that they have. So like, again, the unit of account is such a prism through which you see the world, and everything just becomes in relation to that. And this is why Bitcoin is such a paradigmatic shift, because what you're saying is that thing that you use to value all other things and that you use to enable yourself in the world and move through the world, i.e. money, that thing is what's changing now. And that's the paradigm that's changing. And you want to make sure that you have a capacity to use that new mechanism in the new paradigm and not get left behind effectively. And then of course you go down the rabbit hole, why it's going to be more beneficial and what, all the bad stuff it's going to eradicate and all the good stuff it's going to foster. But that shift seems to be such an enormous one, because people inevitably have the question like, well, why do I need to change it at all? What's wrong with it? And then you're like, oh, let me tell you about what's fucking wrong with it. Right. But the first step is just being like, or maybe not the first step, but one of the early steps is, this is not just about getting more fiat, right? This is about replacing fiat. And as a result, this is not everything that you do almost is an investment, right? Because in relation to your future self. So that, you could nitpick and say that, but effectively what you're trying to get them to realize is that this is a one-way street, right? Like what Bitcoin is saving, as is so often said, so getting people to realize that that's the game that's afoot here, that you're actually trying to shift over to another system rather than just have another means of taking extra risk with your savings. I can imagine it is difficult, because I've tried to do it myself. And I suspect is one of the main purposes of you using kind of colloquial, not too academic language in the book.
Right. Well, and that's the question I get probably more than any other thing. Mostly on the jiu-jitsu mats after practice. That's the number one time that guys sit around and we'll, talk about whatever. And a lot of times when it's a bull market, everybody's talking about Bitcoin or the Dogecoin they just bought or whatever it is. And they always ask me, they inevitably turn to me at some point and they say, Brian, when's the time to sell? I said, well, I'll tell you the perfect time to sell. I even say this in the book. I'll tell you the exact perfect time to sell. I know exactly when I'm going to sell. Never going to sell. Like, that's the point. I've never planned to sell my Bitcoin. I plan to buy more stuff with it than it can buy today. Like that, if you look at it through that way, like I can buy X amount with Bitcoin today. I can buy more in the future with it. That's the only way I'm thinking about it. Because it starts to, when you say that to somebody, it starts to reframe like, oh, wow, that makes sense. And I love that old meme. I even included in the book. I don't know if you remember seeing that. And its price prediction didn't really come true, but it says like, in 2013, you could buy like a few groceries. It shows a shopping cart. And, and each year, like the shopping cart gets more and more full. And then by 2020 or 2021, you can buy a Lambo with a Bitcoin or whatever the meme shows. But it just shows this progression in value, because we so often, that denominator, that thing that we denominate all of our life in, right? Where we exchange our time and our service and our energy and all these things, has always been US dollars. And so like you said, it's a paradigmatic shift where people have a hard time understanding that. I even quote my own CPA in the book, and he gave me permission to do that. He has such a hard time with talking about Bitcoin as a unit of account, just because you don't pay your taxes in it. And I said, okay, I understand that. I understand, but well, I mean, there's more places that are allowing you to pay your taxes in Bitcoin. That's changing as we speak. But I said, why wouldn't you, as an accountant, fall in love with Bitcoin for accounting purposes? It's the most audited, most transparent ledger in human history. So the very people that are like coming after it for it not being a unit of account should be the ones that love it the most. And I think they actually will in time love it the most for its unit of account qualities. It's just so fair and transparent for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, the other one, especially relevant in the last 2 years is, people will say, well, how could it be a unit of account? It's so volatile. And Bitcoiners will somewhat tongue in cheek say, well, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. And then the person will be like, yeah, that's not a real answer. It's like, well, hold on. Why isn't it a real answer? Because your presumption or your assertion is 1 USD equals 1 USD, but that's not true. I mean, what ratio, what are we using to establish a ratio here?
Yeah.
Because of, like, as we all know, if you look at the monetary expansion of the USD over the last 2 years, it's something like 40+%. Mm-hmm. And that's been represented, in 100% increases in prices in certain domains and 10% in others. But the punchline is your 1 USD equals 1 USD isn't valid either. You're not comparing apples to apples in terms of purchasing power. So, the USD expanded 40+%, Bitcoin is down 60 whatever percent. So again, like that at a minimum, and that is obviously not the full story there, but at a minimum should, give people a moment of pause to say, oh, like the thing that I'm seeing market value through is tremendously important. And you have to be extremely careful of what you use to perceive market value, because it's very difficult to see the corruption and the false perceptions that corruption induces if you're not aware of it. And this is why we have, the chaos that we have in markets today, and why people's savings are being diluted and siphoned away, and why all this inflation, because people are looking everywhere else but the prism through which they're interpreting market value.
Yeah.
And once they do that, like once they're able to create that space and step back for a second, I think that's when the journey of looking at the qualities or attributes of different monies historically and different monies currently available today, that's when that journey begins. Be like, well, what attributes do you think logically would create a better money, a better prism through which to determine market value, a better prism through which to establish exchange ratios between all things, right? And what would be more fair? Would it be more fair for you to give away your time and energy, i.e. work day in and day out for however many years, and you receive something that can easily, without any, theft, violence, anything, just be siphoned away from you in a snap? Or do you think it's more fair that the work that you're able, the savings that you're able to accrue as a result of your work, you're able to keep with the same degree of fidelity from the day you made it? Well, let's assume full issuance of Bitcoin. That's always been my assumption. I don't consider like we're at 18 million right now. I consider the full issuance is 21 million. And whatever I'm able to accrue, that ratio between what I have and 21 million will always be the same. Does that seem more fair to you? And of course, people will kind of maybe think on that for a bit and be stumped. I mean, because it is so ingrained, and it is so below the surface. Money is, it really is an operating system. Everything else is above the surface. You're complaining about meat prices, you're complaining about oil prices, house prices. Everything else is out in front of you to be seen, except the thing that's permitting you to see effectively.
Yeah.
And so, for those reasons, I can appreciate why it's difficult. But again, that's kind of why I think the 1 BTC equals 1 BTC is more than tongue in cheek, because what you're saying is, look, I've replaced the monetary prism that I'm seeing the world through. I've replaced my unit of account. So what I'm concerned with is accumulating more Bitcoin. And as many of that's what I'm watching, not the volatile USD exchange rate or fiat exchange rate of whatever fiat to Bitcoin, because I realize all the different, influences that can have, and it's going to wax and wane as this money monetizes from zero value to a purchasing power of whatever per sat or per Bitcoin. And but I do think that part of the issue with like if people get that's great, but I think, like as you mentioned at the beginning, everyone wants to create their own money. It's because it's the greatest incentive in the world. And if you can do that and convince people that you've done it and create a nice story around it, then you stand to gain a lot of money. But you create this environment where now everything is seen as a speculative investment. And so instead of being seen as this paradigmatic perceptual shift in relation to value, it's now just seen as like all these different games you can play to get more of the initial unit. And I think for that reason, it really muddies the water for newbies to think that like, well, why would all these other things exist if, ultimately they were kind of bullshit and I was only supposed to be making this one change. And, I actually be interesting, the question for you off the back of this rant, but when you sit down with the guys on the mats and you're sitting against the wall afterwards, how do you explain the distinction between all the exciting shit that they see and like the 100 X's and this stuff and, what is a really, well, it's kind of sexy to me, but for most people, changing out an old money for a new money, like an upgrade to the monetary system, is not particularly exciting to most people.
It's not until they get it. Once they have like their light bulb moment, then guys won't stop talking about that, right? But we're talking about that they never heard about Bitcoin or crypto, then they bought some Doge and now they're in the game. Like that's those type of people. I tell people all the time, I actually bring this up in the book because they say, why can't I just create my own cryptocurrency? Because you could literally take Bitcoin and copy its source code and have, John Bitcoin 2.0 or whatever tomorrow. Like, why does Bitcoin, as we know at BTC, have value of 22,000 or 21,000, whatever it's at today, this market value at that priced at that, but shouldn't John's Bitcoin have market value as well? And the analogy I'll usually use for those guys is I'll say, you know what, you can go out and you could create your own language today. Like create your new language. I'll create, Brianisms, and I'm going to, I can create verbs, adverbs, pronouns, everything that I need to construct a language. I can have phonetics, sentence structure, everything about a language. But does my language have any value if I'm the only one using it? Right? It goes back to, why does English have value? English as a language has value because it has network effect. You can go to almost any corner of the world and use English. Like you can use it for commerce. You can use it for relationships. You can use it to communicate with friends. You can use it to communicate, to get directions. You can use English for so many things. My new language that I just created, it has a network of one. And so there's no value there, right? Mm-hmm. Bitcoin, and this goes back to the decentralization and the network effect of Bitcoin. Bitcoin has network effect. Bitcoin has decentralization. You can go to any corner of the world and use Bitcoin. I can't take, my cryptocurrencies that are, X, Y, and Z, number 227 on CoinMarketCap, and I can't go around the world and use it to transact. The network effect of it is so small that it essentially makes it valueless. And so when I talk about it like that analogy right there for most people seems to click. And it's like, hey, why try and reinvent the wheel? Why try and invent a new language and go through all the headaches of that? Like if you put enough time and effort into it, you might get a few people to adopt your new language. It's going to be painful. You're going to have to, spend all your time doing that, when there was a perfectly good language that you could have tapped into and used all that value. And you could have put your economic energy into using English and using it to create real value within that economy and stuff. So for most people, that tends to be that kind of the click light bulb moment for like, okay, like a network effect does mean something in terms of cryptocurrency.
Totally. And I think sometimes the refrain is then, well, how do you overcome the USD network effect? And so I would think the other part of that is that if you are going to assume that a new language or a new money is emerging, whether it's you doing the one who, who's invented it or otherwise, you have to ask the question, what attributes does it have that make it or would make it more superior or more useful or more capable at discovering value, let's say, than the incumbent? And the reason why that question is insanely relevant is because it speaks to the survivability of it, right? Like the risk is in all of these things, like, sure, you can make your own language and all that kind of stuff, but will it last? And as a result, how much risk are you taking by devoting your time and energy and opportunity cost to it? Because if it ends up not lasting, then you're on the short end of that stick. So you want to be aligned with the one that has the greatest chance of lasting. And then, of course, in order to determine that, you have to look at the attributes and say, network effects are definitely important, but you have to say, well, what other attributes about this thing are going to allow it the greatest chance at lasting the longest, and therefore mitigating the degree of risk or loss that I'm assuming by aligning myself with it, be it a language, a money, or something else. And I think, that's part of the reason why monies and languages, but even money even stronger, converge on a dominant one, because one asserts its ability to survive better than the rest, which is why part of the argument or discussion against the validity of altcoins and other cryptocurrencies, at least if we're talking about money. But then it begs the question, like, well, if we're not talking about money, what are we really talking about with tokens and stuff? And what are we talking about with, well, if you're trying to do something that doesn't need censorship resistance in the first place, and why do you need an economic incentive to make it work? And why couldn't you just integrate the money that everybody wants anyways? The more valued, the more dominant, the more likely to succeed and survive money. But it's a lot to take on. And I think the language example is a good initial one for people to realize, how much goes into making one of these protocols dominant, whether it be a language protocol or a money protocol or what have you.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about the opportunity cost that me as the creator would have, right? If I'm putting all this time and effort into building this language out that people are using, I also have to think about the ethical concerns of all the other people's opportunity costs that I got to adopt my language and waste their time as well, right? There's an ethical concern there. I think a lot of people don't care about it, but there certainly is an ethical concern. But one of the things that I'll go to, and yeah, like that, you're right, that is the next question. So the guys that are digging a little deeper, they'll say, okay, I get the network effect side, but what qualities? And then they'll bring that up. Well, like US dollar has a really good network effect. You're right, it has a really powerful network effect. There's some cool historical precedents, though, for where the qualities of Bitcoin would make it superior to the US dollar. So I mean, you and I understand Bitcoin's far superior to the US dollar, but we're talking to a new person, ground zero Bitcoin, learning kind of thing. And so I go back to, I use the Weimar Germany example, because a lot of people, if we took high school history, we remember Weimar Germany. Anybody that studies Bitcoin remembers Weimar Germany because we talk about the hyperinflation, but a lot of people don't know the details of it and how severe that was. But just in a nutshell, it was a 4-year cycle. That hyperinflation happened in a really short period of time. It was right after, basically towards the end of World War I, and then about 4 years after. Their entire, and I got this from Jens Parsons' Dying of Money. I don't know if you've ever read that book. It's a really, really great book on the German hyperinflation and then the 1970s stagflation we had in the United States. But he documents it in really, really good detail. But the German debt was 60 billion marks. So the German mark the Reich mark was their currency at the time. That's the one that got hyperinflated. And this proves the point of why governments hyperinflate to get out of debt, but that's not even my point here. So they had a 60 billion mark debt. By the end of that 4-year cycle, by the end of that hyperinflation, their smallest unit, their smallest bill was a 1 trillion mark note. So their entire debt was literally the equivalent to 60 cents. It was only 60% of their smallest note was their entire national debt. So it just proves how you can inflate away a debt. But my point as far as what qualities Bitcoin would have to be better than a fiat currency in this circumstance, not a lot of people understand or know how the German economy fixed their hyperinflation. So they had the Reich mark, which was the hyperinflating currency, but then they came out with another. It was a government issued one, but this is one of the few times that governments kept to this promise. But they said, we're going to come out with this other currency. It's a sister currency called the Rentenmark. We're going to run them side by side. And I forget what the exact number was, but we'll call it 100 billion. We're only going to print 100 billion of these Rentenmarks. We promise we won't print any more. So you can use either currency. The Reich mark is inflating every single day. The Rentenmark, we're not going to print any more of them. We have a scarce supply of that one. Well, the natural market forces, who's going to use the Reich mark? Everybody naturally went over to the scarce asset. That's actually called Gresham's law. There's an economic law called Gresham's law. People will hold on to the scarce asset and they'll spend or use the non-scarce asset. And so when we're talking about Bitcoin versus any kind of fiat, but in particular the US dollar, because we're comparing, they both have a tremendous network effect. Well, why would Bitcoin be superior to US dollar fiat? Is because of that scarcity principle. In time, Gresham's law says that people will gravitate, natural market forces will gravitate towards scarce assets versus unlimited debasing currencies. And so we've seen that. And so that Weimar Germany proves that point. And essentially every other fiat currency in history also proves that point. But the German one was particularly interesting because they made a fiat currency that was scarce. That usually doesn't happen. You usually don't see governments creating fiat currency. And eventually, years later, they ended up debasing that one as well. But there was a period of time where they stuck to that, and that fixed their inflation problem for a while. The cool thing about Bitcoin, there's nobody to go back on that promise. Bitcoin's going to hold to that promise 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 200 years from now. So we don't have to trust that the consensus is going to change.
Right. Yeah. And here kind of scarcity being used as a proxy or stand-in for purchasing power. Right. So, basically the market will choose the money that's more likely or is retaining more of its purchasing power and spend the one that's losing it more rapidly, or if the former is not losing it at all, then losing it, so that they can maximize their economic, potential or optionality and spend it before it becomes, worth even less. Yeah. It's, I mean, one, it's remarkable that this experiment has been run so many times, and it's not taught in the academic textbooks largely, and people don't really know about it, but it's not like we need to figure it out once more. I mean, it's happened so many times in so many places. And now, unfortunately, the experiment's being run on a global scale. And I think we all know what the inevitable destination of that experiment is, which is why we're all so grateful that something like Bitcoin exists. But yeah, and when you're explaining it to these people, it's not just the additional scarcity. I mean, as you mentioned about the trucker convoy, privacy and censorship, financial censorship, has come to the fore over the last couple of years as well. And, it could easily just be positioned like, well, one money, the government or institutions, and as a result of that, the government is going to be able to know your movements, what you buy, when you buy it, how much you spend it, where you send your money, everything about you. And another one, you're going to have a lot more privacy, in conjunction with being stolen from through inflation and all that kind of stuff. So which one would you prefer? And then I think a lot of people come to the point like, well, how is it being used? Like, why is it being used? And I think that's when you sit them down for the serious discussion. It's like, well, you're being forced to use fiat currency, ultimately, through a couple of moves on the chessboard, through the barrel of a gun. It's by force. You don't have a choice. How do you feel about that? And then it's like, there's hesitation. There's like, no, there's disbelief. They go through the cycle of, what is it? Not the addiction cycle, but where they go through despair and disbelief and anger.
Grief cycle.
Exactly. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. I mean, how do those conversations go? I'm assuming, I haven't said this yet, but I'm assuming that you've written this book, and both you've written it as a result of, and as a consequence of, you've had like a ton of these orange pilling discussions. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely. And even the guy that writes the foreword of my book, it's just he's a world champion jiu-jitsu guy too. I keep bringing it back to jiu-jitsu, but yeah, I mean,
who is it?
I don't know if you would know him. His name's Eric Gooden, IBJJF competitor. There's jiu-jitsu so big now. People tell me all the time, "Oh, do you know about this world champion?" I'm like, I pay a lot of attention to jiu-jitsu, and guys are constantly. They're usually Brazilians. Usually the Brazilians, I can't remember their name because they have like 4 names. But anyways, Eric Gooden's the guy's name. But yeah, so yeah, you have these conversations, and I think a lot of people it's what is that called? Like, it's like when you want to remain willfully ignorant. It's a cognitive dissonance, right? Mm-hmm. There's this cognitive dissonance that happens often. I think people want to repress it, and so they like you know what? It's just so much easier that I'm just going to buy a crypto and then speculate on it. I don't want to think about, I don't want to think about all this complicated money stuff. I said, okay, that's fine. You don't have to right now, but I want to be the pebble in your shoe. I want to be that thing that when this comes up, and when you hear your friends, because I mean, in the Bitcoin community, we've been talking about inflation being a thing years before COVID, right? I think most people that heard me talking about in my circles, that heard me talking about inflation in 2014, 2015, 2016, they thought I was crazy back then. But all those friends have then since come back around and said, okay, I want to learn more about Bitcoin because you were talking about inflation like it was going to happen. Now, I don't hear about anything but inflation. So tell me more about it. So I think that when we're having these conversations with our friends and family, we need to be willing to be okay with them just kind of pushing this away, because yeah, it's like the movie The Matrix, where there's people that want to stay in the Matrix, right? That's even a part of the movie. There's people that want to get out and they want that freedom. That's the whole point of the red pill, blue pill thing. And that's why we call it the orange pill. Is like, are you willing to take this orange pill? Because with what I'm telling you right now comes a truth that is going to change the way that you see the world. And some people want that and they're willing to accept it. And so, yeah, it can go one way or the other. But I think that the positive thing about COVID is that people are thinking about the world in this way. Like they still, most people weren't connecting it to the money, but they all of a sudden saw that, like, wow, why did I get fired from my job because I didn't take a vaccine? Or why did I get fined on the airplane because I pulled my mask down to drink something and I didn't pull it back up fast enough or whatever. Right. I have a friend that he's literally not allowed on Delta Airlines anymore because he was taking his mask down too much. It's like, why? People starting to ask the question why, and so it inevitably leads them to the money. And yeah, you're right, there's this grief cycle. And I think more than anything, the way I try to, the people that take the orange pill and have that grief cycle, and I try to bring them back to the hope side of it, is like, hey, the cool thing is these things were going to be a problem anyways. Like you said, we've had fiat currencies blow up, but on a national level. This blow up is going to be on a global level. And so it's pretty cool. And I think it's almost like divine intervention to some degree, as far as the time in history that we got a decentralized money for the first time ever. And you could argue that gold was like natural money or whatever, but even then governments still had to put their stamp on the coins and things like that. It's just interesting. And so there's actually a lot of hope. I could imagine if we didn't have Bitcoin, we would be giving the same pitch to people and be like, by the way, the end of the story is we're all screwed.
You're fucked.
Yeah. There's no getting out of this. Hey, there's hope at the end of the tunnel. You brought up kind of CBDCs. You're alluding to them earlier. I have a section in the book where I talk about CBDCs. I actually had one guy, I think he just jumped straight into that section and he didn't even read the whole section. But it almost sounds like I'm talking positively about CBDCs. I'm not. I think that they're atrocious. I do think they're going to be the best advertisement ever for Bitcoin. So in a positive sense, I think they will be very positive for Bitcoin because they will help people see really how flawed the money is. But in that section, it sounds like I'm almost like congratulating on how awesome they're going to be. It's not because I think they're going to be great. I think it's important for people to understand the narrative that they're going to be pitched with. So for example, if we had CBDCs right now, the Federal Reserve, if they wanted to, could kill inflation in an afternoon. They could press a button and they could tell everybody you only have $30 to spend out of your bank account today. Mm-hmm. And so they would have all sorts of tools in their toolbox. Think about in economics, we don't have really good metrics for surveying our GDP. Like we have a kind of an idea of what our gross domestic product here is in the United States, but we don't have programmatic money. If you had programmatic money, you could have incredible detail about your economy and you'd be able to, in a real way, study the economy in a much more robust way. So economists will gravitate. There will be a set of economists that are going to talk about CBDCs as unlocking a prosperous future and all these things. CBDCs will be able to stimulate the economy faster because in an afternoon, we can give everybody more money. We can limit money to, we can limit the velocity of currency in order to curb inflation and all sorts of things like that. So it's one of those things where we need to understand what the positive narrative behind those things is going to be so that we can kind of get out in front of it and tell people like, hey, just so you know, these things are going to sound great. And you're going to, I wouldn't be surprised if when CBDCs come out, the first people that sign up for a wallet are going to get $100, loaded or airdropped into their wallet. There's going to be all sorts of incentives to adopt CBDCs. And we might all have to adopt it on some level, again, maybe to pay our taxes or pay fines or whatever it happens to be. But people need to understand that there is an exit hatch. I think Michael Saylor said it, that if you're in a room and all the oxygen's being sucked out, Bitcoin's like that mask that drops down out of the airplane that you can put some fresh oxygen on. And so, yeah, it's important to understand like we were talking about chess before, it's important to think a few steps ahead of like, what is the Federal Reserve? What is the US federal government going to be saying about CBDCs in order to get people to do it? Because yeah, I think a lot of people, the average person, might be a little bit nervous about, well, government money, being programmed, and they're going to have, less privacy. They're going to say, well, yes, you might have less privacy, but guess what? Here's all these amazing things that are going to come with it. And yeah, we'll give you $100. How does that sound? Okay, let's do it. So we want to make sure that we're out ahead of those things. Like I said, the people that I've been able to win over most effectively about Bitcoin were the people that I was telling about inflation and Bitcoin 3 or 4 years ago. And they're like, wow, what you said has really come to fruition. I'm really seeing that. I kind of want to do that same thing right now, talking about CBDCs. If we can get out in the Bitcoin community and tell people, here's what you're going to be hearing about CBDCs in a year or two from now. And then when they start to hear those things in the news, they're gonna be like, wow, those Bitcoin people, they were out ahead of this. Like maybe there's something that we should be paying attention to from that community.
Yeah, totally. I think that's spot on. And, I think another reason why the last 2 years have been, one of the benefits or silver linings has been, as you said, I mean, this increased distrust of institutions that were formerly highly trusted. And now for most people, maybe that didn't happen in relation to their money, but maybe it happened into the relation to their job, transportation, whatever, an institution that put limitations on how that arrangement or the relationship had traditionally been, constituted. And I think that helps, because what we're discussing here with this paradigm shift, and as you said, like, it's really hard. Your perception of the world brings together a lot of stuff, and it's, you make order out of the chaos of the world by piecing all these quote unquote known things together. And then that's, your shield for going out into the world and engaging the world and trying to actualize, your desires or what you're trying to accomplish. And when you introduce information that threatens that, most often you get, instead of like a logical discourse about the reasoning and the attributes and stuff, you just get emotional pushback, because it's such an emotional thing to critique or question the very perceptual framework that someone's adopted to actually be who they are out in the world. So like, I get it. It's a lot, but I think that conversation becomes a lot easier in the context of the last 2 years, where people are naturally just being like, oh, maybe I didn't have the right understanding of XYZ institution or relationship with government or, money or any of that kind of stuff. And then, that certainly makes the Bitcoin discussion a lot easier to be had. And of course, central or CBDCs are like a top-down central planner's dream. This will allow for complete control. And I think over time, of course, a Bitcoin parallel system and economy is developing and will continue to develop. And by virtue of the added degree of freedom and the added capacity for wealth generation and value signaling and pristine prices and all that stuff, it's just going to so greatly outcompete the former. And so that'll probably happen in pockets and kind of under the surface initially, and then it'll become more and more apparent over time. But of course, like you said, a bunch of people are going to be hoodwinked into the CBDCs, because most people just don't consider these things, and they'll probably refuse to, even under fairly dire circumstances. I mean, because probably to me and you and a lot of Bitcoiners, dire circumstances happened like decades ago. It's like, really? Like you're going to be forced to use a money that just, it's got a trap door built in. They can steal from you as much as they want. And maybe they've only been stealing, 10 or 15%, because they've been feeling generous. But now that they're in a pinch, they're stealing 40 and 50. And all the institutions that you use that money are tracking your information and your data and selling it and using it and losing it and creating all these, hazards, moral and otherwise, for you. And so I think a lot of us would be like, the point of no return, or like the line in the sand has been crossed a long time ago. But for some people, I mean, I do wonder, like, what would the line in the sand look like? I mean, your entire financial life is completely controlled in every single capacity. You can be shut off in a moment's notice. Everything is surveilled, all that stuff. And like a huge portion, at least for now, would still put up with that, because they've put up with that in a more dilute form for the last several decades. And this is why I think it's important to discuss the the detrimental effects of these new top-down technologies that are being developed, but it's far more productive to amplify the beneficial effects of people in Bitcoin and what the Bitcoin economy is producing, because people don't want to hear bad news. They want to see beauty and vibrance and ways in which their life can be made better. And that's what Bitcoin is, right? Like adopting Bitcoin as your unit of account, engaging in Bitcoin, stacking sats, engaging with other people that are doing the same, that see the same value and value, system within Bitcoin. Those are the things that genuinely make your life better. And like, you don't even have to, like try to orange pill people with that regard. They'll just look at these groups or even look at you and be like, why is he so, the world's kind of going crazy and he's so calm and like pursuing things that he finds meaningful and he's happy and he's healthy. Like, what's going on? And I think that is going to end up being a far stronger incentive or, signal to people than the doom and gloom message, because the doom and gloom message has been around forever, right? Like there's always been someone talking about all the crazy conspiracies that go on in the world, and many of which are probably true in some respect, right? Like, how controlled people are and who controls the world and all the garbage you're eating and injecting and watching. But there's
no
and
hope
listening
in that, right? They're not
right.
Really,
yeah. You're just like, I don't, maybe even if I subconsciously think you're right, I don't even want to know it, because that's going to invite a lot of darkness into my life, and I don't need any more darkness. Things are already a bit despair. I mean, I'm a little bit sad already, so I don't need that shit.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I talk a bit in the book about that. Yeah, I think there's going to be things that you can do. That's why I called it Bitcoin evangelism, because I see so many parallels between, as a Christian, I'm trying, out there trying to tell people about my faith and that sort of thing. And so I see parallels in that, where, like you said, there's preachers out there, there's Christian preachers that are only preaching hellfire and brimstone, right? How many of those people? And so there's a lot of correlations between Bitcoin language and unsuccessful Christian language that people have used. So it's like, we could just go back and look at the church. Like, when was the church growing, and what were they doing in terms of their evangelism when they were like growing in number, and what times of their existence were they shrinking in number? And you can see, like, yeah, there's and that's almost why I try to stay soft on altcoins to some degree, right? I'll tell somebody, like in Christian, in Christianity, Jesus says he's the only way. And so Christianity says, okay, all other religions are actually not real, and those will lead you to hell. That's a tough truth. And so as a Christian, if I'm going to invite people to church, like, I also have to be soft to my Muslim friend, right? Like I want to speak truth to him because I think he's wrong, but at the same time, I need to act towards him in a way, if I believe that, like, I want to bring him to the truth so that he can go to heaven, I need to be soft towards him. And so bringing that back, I think that's how Bitcoiners ought to be, right? We have toxic Bitcoiners. We have Bitcoin maxis that are toxic. And those are like Christians that are toxic. We've all met Christians that are like, dude, I want nothing to do with church because I don't want to be like you. Like, you're a horrible human being, and because they keep telling me how wrong I am. They basically beat me over the head with the Bible type of thing. And then there's other Christians that are very friendly and welcoming. And it's like, that's kind of the tone that I take with the book, is like, okay, I get where altcoins are coming from. And I think that there's some interesting speculative tech, like Ethereum and smart contracts. I think as a Bitcoin, even as a Bitcoin maxi, you should almost like root for Ethereum to move fast and break things, because if they build something that is really cool, like maybe we could put that in RSK and build it on Bitcoin, right? We can use them as like the R&D department for anything that could eventually someday be built with smart contracts and an actual truly decentralized platform on top of Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I think there's some interesting, like I said, just interesting analogies between faith and spreading the word of Bitcoin. Like you said, there's people that'll tell you hellfire and brimstone, the world's going to hell, in terms of Bitcoin, but at least we have a solution with Bitcoin. There's like this really hopeful, enlightening message. And, how did people adopt the internet? People adopted the internet just by using it. Like my mom, she didn't sit down in 1994 and start to like read about HTTP or something like that. Like she just sent an email, And so if anybody wants to hack and doesn't want to buy my book, but they want to orange pill their friends, literally just have your friend sit down with your friend, download like Wallet of Satoshi or Blue Wallet or any kind of Bitcoin Lightning wallet, have them download the app for free, and then send them 100 sats, and then tell them to send their friends 50 of those sats, like just sitting down and using this technology. As soon as somebody sees like, I just transferred value immediately. And then you pair that with, you tell the person like, hey, now you have full control over your money. Like sometimes you get those light bulb moments and it's like this very positive thing, right? You sat down, you showed them, and it's like, now can you imagine if you were able to do this with your fiat currency? Like that would be amazing, right? And like, that's what Bitcoin promises to be. All the things that we think money should be able to do, but we don't realize that we can't do it. Like I took a bunch of cash out the other day. I was going to go buy an RV. I took out, like $18,000 in cash to go buy something. And I had to fill out a bunch of paperwork. I had to not only tell my bank teller what I was doing with it, I had to tell the manager of the bank what I was doing with the money. I was just like, go F yourself, it's my money. Why do I have to do that? But when you sit down with somebody with a Lightning wallet and you send value immediately, it's like this really hopeful and optimistic message.
Totally. It's like, that Jack Nicholson gif where he's like smiling and nodding, his head. You're like, when you sit someone down and they see a trend, because like the theoretical arguments for Bitcoin, you could talk about them until you're blue in the face. What people really need to do is use it, right? And when they do, I totally agree. Like there's this thing that goes on. It's like, wow, I didn't have to do all those things that I previously had to do in order to send my own money. Right. And so the light bulbs go off and people start going down the rabbit hole. And, in response to the altcoin stuff, and it's kind of, again, the religious analogies abound, but I feel like one of the most fundamental faiths that maybe you could have is that the truth will be revealed through the course of time or in due time or in the end. And maybe whether that's religious truths or whether that's economic truths or whatever. And so like, I hate all the crypto altcoin bullshit. There's so many scams, so many people get burned, so much unethical behavior. I don't think it appreciates, monetary attributes and how this is likely to play out. But one, I have to admit, I don't know for certain the future, obviously. So like, even though I'm a Bitcoin maximalist and extremely bullish on Bitcoin, I don't touch anything else. I don't know that that's the right move. I'm taking some degree of risk. I've done my best to, use the best logic and reason to come to it, but I have to allow that I may be wrong. And so at least for that reason alone, the fact that there are other experiments being run, I guess I have to begrudgingly admit like is possibly a good thing. But more than that, I'm kind of at peace with it because I know, or my faith is that truth will emerge. And if this is the messy process that has to take place for truth to emerge, my friend Gigi always uses the term rectification. Like if there's got to be a lot of rectification to happen so that people come to a truth that works, or is it the maximum form of truth that's available in whatever domain, then that's just kind of the nature of the beast, right? Like how could it be otherwise? You kind of need all these failures to prove the truth. And again, that I think that is applicable to many domains of life, not just the economic or monetary. And so, to the extent that I can help avoid the pain that's associated with that, especially for people that are close to me, like I do try to do that, but I'm not one of the crusaders that tries to like use my platform to do that, because it's just not all that interesting to me. But to your point about, the people that beat people over the head with the Bible and hell and brimstone to try to kind of convince them of the validity of the belief system, or the corollary in like Bitcoin maximalism. First of all, I know a lot of people that have been saved by that approach, so I certainly can't discount it entirely. And like everyone communicates in different ways. Everyone espouses the benefits of certain things. Like some people do genuinely like respond and wake up when you tell them how the monetary system works. They're like, what? Like, I just never considered that. That's fucking terrifying. Or like the, someone who's fleeing a bad situation, you tell them that, Bitcoin can help them out in some way. And, that incentive, maybe they gravitate to it for that reason. So I don't, I'm happy with all the crazy, wonderful, toxic stuff that goes on, because I just see it as the way this is playing out. Like
Sure.
this thing is inspiring each of us to act in a particular way, to speak in a particular way, to evangelize in a particular way. And again, back to the faith about the truth. If what we're dancing around here is some form of truth, even an unprecedented form, at least in the interpersonal or economic realm that human consciousness has never really interacted with before, has any experience with, then I'm kind of happy to sit back and let it emerge through all the messiness, because I think one of the conceits or, pitfalls of the central planning collectivist sort of mindset is that everything can be known and you can account for everything. And that's how you generate the utopia. It's like, we're accounting for these and these and these, and this is good and this is bad, and this is how it should be done, and this is how the resources should be allocated, and what we're going to get afterwards is the utopia. And what you get is the exact opposite. You get the dystopia, you get the collapse, you get the catastrophe. Whereas if you allow truth to emerge in a organic way, then not only do I think you get the best approximation of that truth through the course of time, but you get it in a manner that's sustainable, because every little bit along the way is acting in reference to that and integrating it to the extent that it's beneficial. And if it is, it propagates. And so I love the messiness of it all. And the final point on this one is, we're talking about the strongest incentive for people being that, not the academic theoretical stuff, but looking at other people, whether it's online or in their direct life, and being like, man, how the fuck are they dealing with all this stuff so well? And I do think it's the case. Like, if you wind up on Bitcoin Twitter, especially, and you see all these people like kind of crazy and intense and weird, but also kind of smart, but if nothing else, positive and like kind of happy and having a laugh about it all, it makes you think, like, how are they having that attitude in the backdrop of what's going on in the world? And so the craziness can act as just as strong an incentive to pursue, greater understanding of what the fuck is going on here.
People are attracted to the principled nature of Bitcoin maxis, for sure.
Well, that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is. Yeah. So I guess for clarity's sake, I would never talk softly probably towards of altcoins to somebody that has no understanding. Like, if I'm starting at square one, I'm talking Bitcoin, but I'm talking what I was talking about earlier was being soft towards the guy that comes in and all he owns is Dogecoin, or all he owns is Shiba Inu, that sort of thing. Like,
not call him a fucking idiot.
Hey bro, like, let me tell you, like, here's what we're doing, that sort of thing. But it's funny. I mean, you're talking about the problem with centralization. We know that. I mean, Bitcoiners know that, but it's just, we're seeing that in real time, and it's so clear. Like, Chairman Powell gives a speech the other day. It wasn't even policy. Like, they're doing policy, they're doing rate hikes, but the stock market crashed like $1 trillion in value minutes after one guy's speech. Like, if that's not the epitome of how wrong a centrally planned government is, or a centrally planned economy, I mean, what type of market force happens that a guy says something and then $1 trillion is gone? That absolutely makes no sense. But dude,
they're gonna look back on our time, and they're just gonna, like, a fourth grader's gonna be like, how the fuck did they let things go this far? Like, a group of how many people are in the FOMC? Like eight people,
I think it's
12, 5 people.
Whatever. FOMC. No, I was thinking, FOMC is 8, I think.
So 8 people out of 8 billion, or a little bit less, determine the cost of capital for the world. Like, just whatever, they woke up on one side of the bed, they had some data to look at, they have their own vision of how things should be and what they want to, foster. And they just be like, this is the cost of capital, irrespective of the infinite number of interactions that are supposed to generate that optimal equilibrium of the cost of capital between savers and investors and risk takers. Nope, just 8 people in a room deciding that. I mean, it's so asinine, but the flip side of that is it gives me so much hope that once we have a genuine free market and people are able to retain the fruits of their labor and they're able to express their wants and desires absent distortion, man, like, I think it's going to produce an emergent truth and emergent value and meaning and all the different things that means for people's personal lives, not just, goods and services in the market. that's going to be, well, again, unprecedented. Like, and that's why, we get so excited about the Bitcoin Renaissance. But and you mentioned or in addition to the absurdity there, I saw today that Ursula lady, I think she's like the head of the EU, maybe, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe not the head of, she's some
I know
big up in the EU.
Yeah.
And, the big genius plan was, we're going to cap energy producer profits, and that's going to give us like 120 billion euro windfall. And we'll use that windfall to, ease the pain of people that are paying more for primarily energy, but, other things. Man, how come nobody thought of this before? What a brilliant idea. It's just, it's so
the absurdity.
insane.
And it's like, that person's
exactly.
never run a business before. It's absurd. And it's why did Marxism and this concept of centrally planned governments, or centrally planned even democracies, why did that emerge right after the Industrial Revolution? It's like it emerged because it was like the arrogance of humanity. I think the term that they use is called an eschaton. It means like humanity's reached its highest, its pinnacle. Like we're going to use technology to remove all the work in society. Because you think about it, a factory used to just be like 10,000 guys assembling parts, right? And then all of a sudden you have a machine that comes along, and you only need like 10 guys in the factory because the machine's doing all the other work. So the Marxists and the central planners were thinking, wow, technology is going to completely revolutionize everything. People won't need to work. We can centrally plan everything because technology is going to be so efficient, yada, yada, yada. That's why Marxism emerged. It was on the back of technology. We saw after Marxism was tried that it didn't work out. And people kind of unanimously agreed to that over the last, century or so. It was like that was being proven in real time. But then you had people that were still pushing for it. And they said, okay, here we are, flash forward to 2022. Okay, the Industrial Revolution, that technology at that time looks, silly. Like that wasn't very, very impressive technology. But today we have artificial intelligence. We have computer algorithms. Think of all the effective central planning we can do because of computers and technology and artificial intelligence. So now you see this press for Marxism. You see this press for central planning again because of the emergence of technology. And people think we're at an eschaton again. People think we're at the highest point of human civilization. And so that's why we're seeing the rise in central planning and people thinking that this time it's different, because they thought after the Industrial Revolution, like you said, why have we seen this experiment a bunch of times? Well, the Industrial Revolution, after the Industrial Revolution, they said, well, yeah, we've seen this happen a few times, but we have technology now that's going to make it different this time. Okay, that failed. Now here we are in 2022. Well, why are we doing the centrally planned thing again? Like we've had this experiment and it's failed. Well, no, but the central planners say it's different this time because we have technology on our side. And I mean, historically, it's probably bound to fail again. And you've named a bunch of reasons why it will.
Yeah, I totally agree. Give me 1 second. I got a doorbell happening.
Oh, dang. Okay.
All right, I'm back.
All right. You get your
maintenance guy here a bit early, so we'll have to shut it down shortly. But no, I totally agree, and that's I guess that's part of the reason. We were speculating before why these issues continue to recur, and part of it is because some elements of the circumstance change, and if you don't parse out the circumstance from the principle, then you're bound to repeat the mistake as the circumstances change. Right. And you could apply this not to just to technology, but governance in various ways. I mean, like the whole attack on freedoms that basically happened all around the world as a result of COVID. I mean, like the principles that at least some countries have attempted to enshrine in their founding documents was hard fought wisdom over the course of millennia of like the things that you must make sure you maintain and uphold lest you sow the seeds of your own destruction,
Mhm.
right? Lest you think that, oh, they're not applicable anymore. Times have changed. People are different, whatever, whatever. No, these things don't violate, and you got a chance at surviving.
Mhm.
If you violate them, you're probably going to destroy yourselves. And it was just amazing to me to watch. Not only, I mean, like, not only that they were violated, because they clearly were, but how little discourse there was around them. I mean, it wasn't permitted, right? Like you're
Yeah.
some sort of wacko if you wanted to even have those discussions. And as a result, what that revealed about the degree of what the lack of respect for how they were established, how that wisdom had come about and were established, and just the abject arrogance and hubris of everyone, of assuming that all of this just works and we're not out at each other's throats and all that kind of stuff, just because here we are at this point in history and the big problems are solved now, and we don't have to worry about those problems that like were our undoing in the past. I mean, it's so
Crazy.
arrogant.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Well, yeah, here in California, there's a law or a bill. I believe it was just passed. I think the governor signed it. If not, it passed the House or the Assembly. So it's deep into the process right now. But doctors can get their medical license revoked here in California if they talk to their patients in a way that is counter to the scientific consensus. It's like the craziest. At the same time, when all of our the CDC and all these different agencies are literally going on like a PR thing of like, yeah, we kind of got it wrong. Like, let us get your trust back type of thing. At the same time that they're saying we got it wrong, they're also saying, well, okay, yes, we got it wrong, but we're going to pass bills that if your doctor says anything counter to consensus, it's like, it begs a bunch of questions. It's like, well, how do you achieve consensus when there's no discourse, first of all, right? And then second, like, how do you just show everybody you just messed up? And then you're passing a bill that says, well, if we do this again, like, you have to listen next time, kind of thing. So anyways, all sorts of fun things happening in California on that front.
And again, Bitcoin fixes this because a lot of people don't draw the line between fiat and all this stuff. Bitcoiners obviously do, but people outside our world don't. But when the government can just turn you off at the click of a button, and when as a result of that extreme power, and of course their ability to siphon off wealth and become these giant monoliths, parasites on the people effectively, then all the institutions are beholden to them as well. You got to cozy up, because that is such an extreme form of power, and they can turn you off as well, whether you're a medical board, a school board, a scientific or corporate institution of whatever kind. The power that they hold is exerted over you as well. So you've got to play ball as well. And what you get is just the malice and the incompetence of that monolith being pushed all the way down. And as a result of trying to maintain control, you get with people trying to live their own lives, make their own decisions, come to their own conclusions, but the necessity for that, the maintenance of the power of that top-down thing and the control that exerts, well, of course you get this friction where, from bottom up, people are trying to be free and determine things for themselves. And the incentive of the top-down thing is to increasingly tighten the grip of control. And I think that is, you won't resolve it entirely as long as you have a form of collective governance like that with a money like Bitcoin. But I think most people far underestimate how much it will be resolved when people can't so easily be shut off, when they're more independent, when they're more sovereign, and when, as a result of their own sovereignty, those institutions can't gain that degree of unfair, undeserved power and influence.
Yeah, that's a great point. So this weekend, I'm going to this thing called the Beef Initiative. I don't know if you heard about Texas Slim. He had a viral video kind of recently, but there's a bunch of Bitcoiner. Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, that event is all about what we're talking about. You're talking about Bitcoin fixes this. So you fix the money. Well, their event is about, beef. It's about getting beef meat to their whole model is getting it directly to the consumers. Right. And these farms that are these independent, decentralized farms, they're getting shut down. I think it was Miller's farm recently got shut down by the USDA. And it really kind of for no reason. Like they weren't finding like disease on the farm or anything like that. It was basically kind of this arbitrary shutdown. And what the farmers are saying is they're coming after us. They don't like that we're not these major conglomerates that they can just shut off one switch and shut down this whole operation. Like they'd have to shut down a bunch of different farms in order to shut down this network. And so anyways, these farmers or these ranchers, they have a conference that it's 50% of what they're talking about is beef and 50% of what they're talking about is Bitcoin, because they're essentially saying the government is shutting us down right now. If we want to continue to have an economy where we can sell our products, we need a decentralized money. We need like you said, we need a way that they can't shut us off. Because how do you shut everybody off? Like there's some businesses, like if you were going to shut, people down, you have to shut people off in different ways. Money's the one way where you can shut every single person off, right? You can censor people off of social media. That's one way to shut somebody down. You can censor people from their work, but as soon as you censor somebody's money, you're censoring every element of their life. So money's it's the backstop that we have as individual freedoms. Anthony Pompliano, I quote him in my book. He says, if you don't have the freedom to transact, then you don't have freedom. And it's like, that's just it distilled down to such this perfect point. Yeah. The founding fathers didn't have the ability, like you said, they had thousands of years of wisdom put into the Constitution, but there was no mechanism to have this technological backstop of money, right? All the founding fathers were very much against fiat currencies. Like I quote a lot of the founding fathers in my book. They were against central banks. They were against fiat currencies because they understood that could be the undoing of this constitutional republic, checks and balances, democracy that they had created. And they were right. Like that has been the undoing of this like brilliant system that they had. There's these really centralized points to the system that people could undo their brilliant work. So I think the founding fathers would have written extensively about Bitcoin as part of the backstop for securing our freedom.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I love to see the initiatives like the beef initiative. I think that's going to happen in a variety of different industries and product lines and stuff. People are going to see the beneficial confluence or convergence that Bitcoin can bring to whatever their thing is. And it's going to keep happening. And again, I think that's how the parallel system that's how the parallel system emerges. And that's how the parallel system ultimately comes the system. And so I think that's awesome. And I hope people out there continue to do initiatives like that. I hate to do this, man, because I'm sure we could talk for ages, but I got to bounce. So final question for you is, I know this is like a super casual fan question, but who you got in the super fight on Sunday between Gordon Ryan and Galvao?
Man, everybody in my gym is like, they're purists, so they're like Galvao. But dude, Gordon Ryan, you gotta love to hate him. You can't stand hearing him talk, but he's so good for the sport of jiu-jitsu because he brings eyeballs in. So it's like Conor McGregor, man. It's like a car wreck. You just can't. You just watch it. Like it makes jiu-jitsu very exciting because jiu-jitsu to guys like you and me, we could sit and watch a no time limit match and just be like enthralled because, oh my gosh, he got an underhook or something like that. But with Gordon Ryan, you're watching a little bit more than just underhooks and positions. You're watching kind of this phenom within the sport. So I'm gonna have to say I got Gordon Ryan on this one. I think he's gonna get out wrestled. But I think he's probably gonna get a sub.
Yeah, I kind of lean that way as well. My biggest gripe with Gordon Ryan is that I'm guessing like Roger Vera's throwing a bunch of money at jiu-jitsu guys because he's such a jiu-jitsu guy himself. And Gordon has come out with a Bcash logo on his back on some of his matches. I'm like, it's Bitcoin and jiu-jitsu. It's such a nice, as we said at the beginning, it's such a good, crossover. And instead, you have one of the worst shitcoins of all time on the back of one of the greatest of all time. It seems wrong, but that'll be fixed in the course of time, like everything, I suppose.
Yeah.
Brian, so the book is Evangelizing Bitcoin, available you did the Audible recording today. When will that be available on?
So Audible should be up next
to purchase.
Yeah. Audible should be up next week. And so the Kindle book, the physical book is all available on Amazon. It's Bitcoin Evangelism. And I hid a Bitcoin wallet inside of the book. So if you find the 12-word seed phrase, you can just plug those into a Bitcoin wallet, and there's like $700 worth of Bitcoin. It's 3.1 million Satoshis that are hidden in the book. So there's a little Easter egg hunt when you're reading the book. Nobody's found them. I had one guy or a couple guys message me. They found like 8 of the 12 words so far. And periodically on my Twitter, I drop some hints every once in a while if people are having a hard time finding them.
That's awesome. Everyone loves the little Bitcoin Easter egg.
Yeah.
Brian, thanks again for the chat and the time, and keep in touch. We'll do this again sometime.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it, man.
All right. Cheers, brother. See ya.
Cheers.